Mom, we don't have enough plates for you. Those 8 words shattered 27 years of unconditional love in a single text message. I stared at my phone, standing on my own son's porch, holding the peach cobbler I'd driven 3 hours to bring him. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to speak these truths that so many of us carry in silence. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 63, I thought I knew what family meant. I believed that all those years of sacrifice, all those midnight fevers I nursed, all those dreams I postponed so my children could chase theirs, I believed it all added up to something. A place at the table, a voice that mattered, a mother who belonged. I was wrong. The November wind cut through my wool coat as I stood on Ryan's front porch in suburban Chicago, clutching that cobbler like it was my last connection to being wanted. Through the dining room window, I could see the warm glow of candles, hear the clink of wine glasses, catch glimpses of my daughter-in-law, Julia's perfectly manicured hands gesturing as she told some story that made everyone laugh. Everyone except me, because I wasn't invited to hear it. The peach cobbler was still warm from my oven, made with the same recipe my mother had taught me 40 years ago, the same one Ryan used to beg for every birthday, every celebration, every time he needed comfort. I'd gotten up at 5 that morning to start the filling, carefully selecting each peach from the ones I'd bought at the farmer's market specifically for this lunch. This family lunch that Julia had personally invited me to just 4 days earlier. "Margaret," she'd said over the phone, her voice honey-sweet in that way that should have warned me. "Why don't you come for Sunday lunch this week? The kids have been asking about Grandma." The kids, my grandchildren, 7-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Michael, who used to run to my arms every time I walked through that door. Now they barely looked up from their tablets when I visited. I'd spent the entire morning preparing, not just the cobbler, but myself. I'd put on the navy dress Ryan had complimented once, the one that made me feel less invisible. I'd styled my graying hair the way the salon girl had shown me, applied lipstick that didn't quite hide the worry lines around my mouth. I'd even practiced stories in the car during that 3-hour drive. Funny anecdotes about my students from my substitute teaching jobs. Updates about the community garden I'd started behind my apartment building. Things that might make me interesting enough to deserve a seat at their table. But there I stood, locked out, listening to my own family celebrate something I wasn't part of. Through the window, I could see my son's back as he carved what looked like a beautiful roast. His shoulders relaxed in a way they never were when I was around. Julia moved through their dining room like a queen in her domain, wearing a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her parents were there, the Washingtons, with their old Chicago money and their subtle way of making everyone else feel small. I could see Julia's mother's silver hair perfectly coiffed, her father's golf course tan even in November. And there were other people too, faces I didn't recognize, couples around Ryan and Julia's age, all laughing at something, all belonging in a way I apparently didn't. 8 people around a table that had seated 10 just last Christmas when I'd been allowed to attend. When I'd been the one who'd brought 3 dishes and stayed after to clean up while Julia entertained in the living room. My phone buzzed with Ryan's text, and I read it 3 times before the words sank in. "We don't have enough plates." In the house where I'd helped them pick out china for their wedding registry. The same dining set I'd made the down payment on when they were young and struggling. The plates I'd washed countless times during my visits, always offering to help, always being told to just relax and be a guest, Mom. I knocked again, softer this time. Maybe they hadn't heard. Maybe this was some mistake. Through the frosted glass of their front door, I could see movement, shadows of people enjoying themselves just a few feet away from where I stood, unwanted. Emma's laugh floated through the air, high and delighted. It was the same laugh she used to make when I'd read to her, when I'd braid her hair, when I'd sneak her extra cookies after dinner. Now that laugh was for someone else's stories, someone else's attention, someone who had earned their place at that table in ways I apparently hadn't. The wind picked up, rattling the storm door and cutting through my coat like it was paper. My fingers were getting numb, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. This was supposed to be my Sunday, too. I'd turned down an invitation from my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez to join her family for dinner. I'd postponed grading papers that needed to be returned Monday morning. I'd reorganized my entire weekend around this moment, this meal, this chance to be part of their lives. My purse buzzed with another text, this time from Julia. So sorry about the mix-up. Rain check. A rain check. Like I was a casual acquaintance they'd double-booked with someone more important. Like 27 years of motherhood could be rescheduled at their convenience. I set the cobbler down on their welcome mat, the one that said "Blessed" in elegant script, and walked back to my car. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking away from more than just dinner. Like I was walking away from the family I'd spent my entire adult life building. One sacrifice at a time. The drive home should have taken 3 hours. Instead, I pulled over twice to sit in empty parking lots and stare at nothing. The first time was at a gas station, where I watched families loading up minivans with snacks and drinks for some adventure I'd never be invited to join. The second time was at a rest stop, where I called my sister Patricia in Phoenix. They what? Patricia's voice crackled through the phone, incredulous. Margaret, honey, did you hear yourself? They locked you out of Sunday dinner? They didn't lock me out, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how they sounded. They just didn't have room. In the house you helped them buy? At the table you helped them pay for? Patricia had never liked Julia. Not since that first Christmas when Julia had forgotten to invite Patricia to dinner. Maggie, when was the last time you said no to them? When was the last time you asked them for something instead of the other way around? I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. When had I become the woman who was grateful for scraps of attention from her own son? When had I started measuring my worth by how useful I could make myself to people who used to need me for everything? That night, in my small apartment that still smelled like the peaches I'd prepared for people who couldn't find room for me, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to remember the last time Ryan had called just to talk. Not to ask me to babysit while they went to some function. Not to request my famous lasagna for a dinner party I wouldn't be invited to. Not to borrow money for Emma's private school tuition or Michael's hockey equipment. Just to talk. To ask how I was doing. To include me in his life because he wanted to. Not because he needed something. The silence stretched back months. Maybe years. And as I sat there, surrounded by the ingredients for a meal no one had wanted me to share, I began to understand that this wasn't the first locked door. It was just the first time I'd been forced to see it. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at a shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were receipts, hundreds of them, each one a small piece of evidence of how I'd been paying for love without realizing it. Private school tuition for Emma, $18,000. I'd worked 3 substitute teaching jobs that semester to cover it when Ryan's promotion fell through. Just until we get back on our feet, Mom, he'd promised. That was 2 years ago. Michael's hockey equipment and league fees, $3,200. He's really talented, Margaret, Julia had gushed over dinner. The coach thinks he could get a scholarship someday. But the registration deadline is tomorrow, and our account is a little tight. I'd written the check that night, using money I'd saved for new tires on my 15-year-old Honda. Their kitchen renovation, $12,000. Think of it as an investment in family gatherings, Julia had said, showing me Pinterest photos of granite countertops and subway tile backsplashes. We'll have so many more memories in a beautiful space. Memories I was apparently no longer invited to make. Down payment on their current house, $25,000. My entire inheritance from my mother's estate. We'll pay you back with interest once we build some equity, Ryan had assured me, his hand warm on my shoulder. That was 7 years ago. I was still living in a 1-bedroom apartment, still driving a car that made concerning noises, still wearing the same winter coat I'd owned for a decade. The receipts told a story I'd been too blind to read while I was living it. Every family emergency that became my financial responsibility. Every vacation they took while I stayed home to water their plants and collect their mail. Every birthday party, graduation ceremony, and holiday dinner where I brought the expensive ingredients and they took the credit for hosting. I remembered Ryan's wedding shower, where I'd quietly paid the catering bill when Julia's maid of honor forgot her checkbook. I remembered Emma's baptism, where I'd covered the reception costs after Julia tearfully confessed they'd overspent on her dress. I remembered last Christmas when I'd bought every single gift under their tree because things are just so crazy at work, Mom, and you're so much better at picking out presents anyway. But it wasn't just money. It was time. Decades of my time. Friday nights babysitting while they went to dinner parties I was never invited to join afterward. Saturday mornings cleaning their house while they slept in because, you don't mind, do you, Mom? You're already up early anyway. Sunday afternoons making their meal prep for the week because Julia's been so stressed with her book club responsibilities. Her book club, the same one I'd asked to join 3 times, only to be told it was full and they weren't taking new members right now. I'd seen their Instagram photos, 12 women my age and younger, laughing over wine and discussing novels I'd probably read before some of them were born, but there was no room for Ryan's mother. Not in their book club, and apparently not at their dinner table either. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our text message history. My thumbs moved automatically to Ryan's name, a reflex built over years of being available whenever he needed something. The conversation thread told its own devastating story. Ryan: Mom, could you pick up Michael from practice? Julia's at yoga and I'm stuck in a meeting. Me: of course, honey. I'll take him for ice cream after. Ryan: Emma needs a costume for the school play. Something medieval? You're so creative with that stuff. Me: I'll pick up supplies this weekend. What's the deadline? Ryan: the washing machine is acting up again. Could you call your repair guy? He likes you better than us anyway. Me: already called. He'll be there Tuesday morning. Page after page of requests, favors, needs that somehow always became my emergencies to solve. And my responses: always yes, always eager to help, always grateful to be needed. When had I stopped being Ryan's mother and become his unpaid employee? I found myself searching for the last time he'd asked about me. Really asked. Not, how are you, as a greeting before launching into his latest crisis, but a genuine inquiry into my life, my feelings, my needs. I scrolled back weeks, then months, my heart sinking with each swipe. There, 8 months ago, after I'd mentioned during one of my babysitting visits that I'd been feeling dizzy and planned to see a doctor. Ryan: everything okay with the dizzy spells? Me: doctor says it's just inner ear stuff. Nothing serious. Thanks for asking, sweetheart. Ryan: good. Hey, while I have you, could you grab some groceries for us tomorrow? Julia's swamped with her pottery class. Even my health scare had lasted exactly 1 text before becoming about their convenience. The pottery class. Another thing Julia had started and abandoned within a month. Like the yoga instructor certification, the life coaching course, and the jewelry making business. All expensive hobbies funded by money they didn't have, supported by my free babysitting so she could pursue her passions. Meanwhile, I'd given up my watercolor painting years ago because the supplies seemed frivolous when Ryan's family needed help with their mortgage. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my cold coffee. I needed to move, needed to walk away from these receipts and their brutal mathematics of one-sided love. But as I turned toward the window, something caught my eye. A framed photo on my kitchen counter. Emma and Michael from last summer, their arms around my waist as we stood by the lake at our family reunion. Except it hadn't really been a family reunion, had it? It had been Margaret's funded weekend getaway. I'd paid for the cabin rental, the groceries, the boat rental, even the gas for both vehicles because Ryan had mentioned money being tight that month. Julia had spent the weekend posting carefully curated photos to social media, tagging it as star family time and me blessed, while I'd spent it cooking, cleaning, and watching the kids while the adults relaxed by the water. In the photo, Emma and Michael looked genuinely happy. That wasn't fake. Their love for me wasn't purchased, wasn't transactional like their parents had become. But even as I held on to that truth, I wondered, were my grandchildren learning that love meant service? That grandma was the person you called when you needed something done, not when you wanted someone to simply be with? Was I teaching them the same painful lesson I'd apparently taught Ryan? My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. Hi, Margaret. Hope you're doing well. Quick question. Could you watch the kids Friday night? Ryan's company party is this weekend and our regular sitter canceled. You're such a lifesaver. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. For 27 years, I would have responded immediately with, "Of course," followed by questions about timing and whether they needed me to bring dinner for the kids. I would have rearranged my Friday evening plans, the community book club at the library that I'd finally worked up the courage to join. Because family came first. Always. But something had shifted since yesterday's locked door. Something had cracked open in that moment when I realized I could be standing 3 feet from my son and still be utterly alone. Instead of responding, I set the phone down and looked around my small apartment with new eyes. It was modest but clean, filled with things I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they impressed anyone else. The mismatched furniture from garage sales and thrift stores, the plants I'd nursed back to health on my tiny balcony, the books stacked on every surface, stories that had kept me company during long evenings when Ryan was too busy to call. This was my space, my life, and maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The phone buzzed again. Also, Emma mentioned wanting to learn piano. There's a really good teacher in our neighborhood, but she's a bit pricey. Thought I'd mention it in case you were looking for a special way to bond with your granddaughter. There it was. The real reason for Friday night babysitting. Not because they wanted me to spend time with my grandchildren, but because they needed to soften me up for another financial request. Piano lessons that would somehow become my responsibility to fund. Just like everything else that mattered to this family I'd spent my life serving. I picked up one of the receipts from the shoebox, the one for Emma's school tuition, and studied it carefully. My signature at the bottom, my bank account number, my money paying for my granddaughter's education while her parents used their income for vacations and wine tastings and pottery classes they'd abandoned by Christmas. For the first time in 27 years, I began to wonder, was I used? The question hung in my apartment like smoke, impossible to ignore once I'd finally allowed myself to think it. And as the afternoon light faded through my kitchen window, I realized that some questions once asked change everything that comes after. I didn't respond to Julia's text about Friday babysitting. For the first time in my life as a mother and grandmother, I simply didn't respond. By Tuesday, my phone was buzzing constantly. Julia. Hey, did you get my message about Friday? Just want to confirm timing? Julia. Margaret? Everything okay? You're usually so quick to respond. Ryan. Mom. Julia says she hasn't heard from you. Are you feeling all right? Julia. I'm getting a little worried. This isn't like you. Please call me back. Ryan. Seriously, Mom, what's going on? Just text me back so I know you're okay. The panic in their messages might have been touching if it weren't so obviously about their convenience rather than my well-being. 24 years of immediate responses had trained them to expect my availability on demand. My silence wasn't concern-worthy because they missed me. It was concerning because their free childcare might not materialize. I turned my phone face down and went to my substitute teaching job at Lincoln Elementary. Third graders learning about butterflies, their faces bright with wonder as we talked about metamorphosis and transformation. One little girl, Sophia, raised her hand and asked, "Mrs. Chen, what if the caterpillar doesn't want to change?" That's a very smart question, I told her, kneeling down to her eye level. But sometimes change isn't about wanting. Sometimes it's about survival. After school, I drove to places I hadn't been in years. The art supply store where I used to buy watercolor paints before Ryan's family became my full-time hobby. The coffee shop where I used to read for hours on Saturday mornings before those became babysitting days. The community center where they offered senior exercise classes that started at 9 a.m., the same time I usually picked up Emma and Michael for their weekend activities. I bought a small set of watercolors and a pad of good paper, $68 that would have gone toward Michael's hockey fees or Emma's piano lessons. Instead, I spent it on something that was just for me, something that had no purpose except my own joy. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and painted for the first time in 3 years. My hands were shaky at first, uncertain, like they'd forgotten how to create instead of just serve. But slowly, colors began to bloom across the white paper. A sunset over Lake Michigan, purple and gold and fierce orange, the kind I used to paint from memory during those rare, quiet moments when my life felt like it belonged to me. My phone rang, Ryan's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then Julia called. Voicemail. Ryan again. Voicemail. By Wednesday morning, I had 11 missed calls and 23 unread text messages. The desperation was escalating. Ryan. Mom, this is really unlike you. I'm starting to get scared. Julia. Margaret, I don't know what I did wrong, but whatever it is, we can talk about it. Please just let me know you're alive. Ryan. I'm thinking about driving over there if I don't hear from you by tonight. Julia. The kids are asking where Grandma is. Emma is getting upset. That last message almost broke my resolve. Emma getting upset. But then I remembered Sunday's locked door, remembered years of being needed only when convenient. And I held firm. Wednesday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over 2 decades. I called in sick to my evening tutoring job and went to see a movie by myself. A romantic comedy that made me laugh out loud in a theater full of strangers who didn't need anything from me except to share the popcorn smell and the dark, quiet space where stories unfolded for their own sake. Afterward, I walked through Millennium Park as the sun set behind the Chicago skyline. Couples strolled hand in hand, families pushed strollers. Teenagers took selfies by the bean sculpture, all of them living their lives without checking their phones every 5 minutes to see who needed them, who required their immediate attention, who couldn't function without their help. When had I forgotten how to exist without being needed? My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Julia's voice, high and strained. Margaret, okay, I'm really confused and honestly a little hurt. I know you saw my messages about Friday and I don't understand why you're ignoring us. The kids keep asking when they'll see Grandma again, and I don't know what to tell them. If you're mad about something, just tell me what it is so we can fix it. This silent treatment isn't fair to anyone, especially not to Emma and Michael. Call me back, please. Silent treatment. As if my refusal to immediately accommodate their latest request was some kind of punishment instead of simply not responding. As if my entire existence was supposed to revolve around their schedule and their needs and their definition of what grandmothers were for. I walked home through neighborhoods I'd never really explored, past windows glowing with warm light, and families gathered around dinner tables where no one was checking their phone, waiting for someone else to solve their problems. Thursday brought a new escalation, a knock at my door at 7 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see Julia standing in my hallway, holding a coffee tray and wearing the concerned expression she usually reserved for when she needed to borrow money. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her makeup carefully applied. This wasn't a casual drop-by. This was a calculated intervention. I didn't open the door. Margaret? Her voice carried through the wood, honey sweet with just a hint of irritation underneath. I know you're in there. Your car is in the parking lot. I brought coffee. The good kind, from that place you like downtown. The place I liked downtown. The expensive coffee shop I'd mentioned once, maybe twice, during the hundreds of conversations where she'd talked about her daily $6 lattes while I nursed my home-brewed Folgers. She'd never brought me coffee before, good or otherwise. But now that she needed something from me, suddenly my preferences mattered. I'm really worried about you, she continued. This isn't like you at all. If something's wrong, we can talk about it. That's what family does. We talk through problems instead of shutting each other out. Family. The word felt foreign coming from someone who'd systematically excluded me from family dinners, family vacations, family decisions that affected my own grandchildren. The same person who'd introduced me to her book club friends as Ryan's mother, instead of by my name, who'd redirected conversations whenever I tried to contribute, who'd made it clear in 1,000 small ways that I was a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be valued. I watched through the peephole as she waited, her foot tapping impatiently against my doormat. After 5 minutes, her carefully constructed concern began to crack. Margaret, this is ridiculous. I know you can hear me. We have plans to discuss, and I need to know about Friday. The kids are counting on seeing you. There it was. Not, we miss you, or we're worried about your well-being. Just, we have plans to discuss, and I need to know. Even her emergency intervention was ultimately about their convenience. She waited another 10 minutes, her polite knocking becoming sharper, more demanding. Finally, I heard her heels click away down the hallway, followed by the slam of the building's front door. My phone buzzed immediately. Julia. I know you were home. This is really hurtful, Margaret. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not fair to the children. Game. As if my exhaustion with being used was entertainment. As if 27 years of saying yes to everything was some kind of performance I was now refusing to continue. Friday arrived. The day I was supposed to babysit so they could attend Ryan's company party. I spent it at the Art Institute instead, wandering through galleries full of paintings created by people who'd found ways to express the inexpressible. I stood for a long time in front of a piece called Woman in Blue, a portrait of someone who looked tired but defiant, her eyes holding secrets and sorrows and a kind of quiet strength. That evening, as I sat in my apartment with my watercolors and a cup of tea, painting another sunset from memory, my phone rang one final time. Ryan's voice on the voicemail was different now, not panicked or concerned, but cold in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, I don't know what your problem is, but you've really let us down tonight. Julia had to cancel her hair appointment to stay home with the kids, and I had to tell my boss we couldn't make it to an important company function. This affects my career, you know. I thought we could count on you, but apparently we were wrong. When you decide to stop acting like a child, give us a call. Maybe we can figure out what's gotten into you. Acting like a child. After 27 years of acting like their personal assistant, their emergency fund, their on-call childcare service. After missing my own life to support theirs, being invisible when convenient and essential when needed. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it again, and for the first time in decades, I slept through the night without checking my phone once. Saturday morning brought an ambush I should have seen coming. I was in my apartment, working on a watercolor of the lake from memory, when I heard multiple car doors slam in the parking lot below. Through my window, I watched Ryan climb out of his silver BMW, followed by Julia, then Emma and Michael from the back seat. Behind them, a second car, Julia's parents, the Washingtons, emerging from their black Mercedes like they were arriving at a board meeting. My heart started pounding. This wasn't a casual visit. This was a coordinated attack. The building's front door buzzed insistently. Once, twice, 3 times. When I didn't respond, my apartment phone started ringing, then my cell phone, both at the same time, creating a discordant symphony of demand that echoed through my small space. "Grandma!" Emma's voice carried through the building's intercom system. "Grandma, we know you're up there. Daddy says you're sick and that's why you haven't been talking to us." Sick? They'd told my grandchildren I was sick to explain my absence, rather than admitting they'd driven me away with their selfishness. Even now, they were rewriting the narrative to avoid taking responsibility. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door humming while she made breakfast. Normal sounds from normal people living normal lives where families didn't stage interventions because grandmothers occasionally said no. The buzzing stopped. For a moment, I thought they'd given up. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving with purpose toward my door. A firm knock. Ryan's voice, using the tone he probably employed with difficult clients at work. "Mom, we know you're in there. We need to talk. This has gone on long enough." More knocking. Julia's voice, higher, more strained. "Margaret, please. The children are here. They miss their grandmother." Using the children as ammunition. Of course they were. "Can we come in, Grandma?" Michael's voice, confused and a little scared. "Mom says you might be mad at us, but we don't know why." My heart cracked a little. They'd brought my grandchildren to manipulate me, but those kids were innocent victims in this mess. They didn't understand that their parents had trained them to see me as a resource rather than a person, that every visit had become transactional rather than relational. I heard whispering in the hallway, then Julia's father's voice, distinguished, authoritative, accustomed to being obeyed. "Mrs. Chen, this is Charles Washington. I think there may be some confusion here that we need to clear up. Family matters should be discussed face-to-face, don't you think?" Charles Washington, who'd never spoken directly to me before today, despite 6 years of family gatherings. Charles Washington, who'd once referred to me as the help when he thought I couldn't hear, who'd made pointed comments about people who can't manage their finances properly while sitting at dinner tables I'd helped pay for. Now suddenly he was concerned about family communication. The knocking intensified. Ryan's voice again, but angrier now. "Mom, This is embarrassing. You're acting like a teenager. We have neighbors here, and you're making a scene. Making a scene. By sitting quietly in my own apartment, painting watercolors and bothering no one. Apparently, my very existence without their permission was disruptive. Margaret. Julia's voice carried through the door, sweet but with steel underneath. I know you heard my messages about Emma's piano lessons. The teacher I found has an opening, but we need to move quickly. These spots fill up fast, and I know how much you want Emma to have opportunities. There it was. Even during their intervention, they couldn't resist slipping in another financial request. Piano lessons that would somehow become my responsibility to fund, just like everything else in their lives that mattered. I stood up from my painting and walked to the door, but I didn't open it. Instead, I spoke through the wood, my voice calmer than I felt. I can hear you just fine through the door. If you have something to say, you can say it from there. Silence. Then frantic whispering. They hadn't expected me to respond. And certainly not on my own terms. Ryan cleared his throat. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. Families don't talk through doors. Families also don't lock each other out of Sunday dinner. I replied quietly, more whispering. Julia's voice defensive. That was a misunderstanding. We explained that. The Washingtons brought extra guests. And you had 10 chairs, I interrupted. I helped you pick them out. I was there when you counted them specifically so you could host large dinners. Well, yes, but which chair was broken, Julia? Which one of those 10 chairs couldn't support me? Silence stretched in the hallway. Through the door, I could hear Emma asking someone what we were talking about, her voice small and confused. Charles Washington's voice cut through the quiet, businessman smooth. Mrs. Chen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Young families today have complex social obligations. Surely a woman of your experience understands that sometimes compromises must be made. A woman of my experience. Code for old, irrelevant, should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. I understand perfectly, Mr. Washington, I said. I understand that I've been paying for the privilege of being excluded from my own family. Now that's not fair, Julia started. $18,000 for Emma's tuition, I continued, my voice growing stronger. $3,000 for Michael's hockey. $12,000 for your kitchen renovation. $25,000 for your house down payment. Shall I continue? The hallway went dead quiet. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Ryan's voice, strained. Mom, we never asked you to keep track. 7 years of babysitting every Friday night so you could attend dinner parties I was never invited to. 3 years of Sunday meal prep so Julia could pursue hobbies she abandoned by Christmas. 5 summers of paying for family vacations I was told were couples only, or adult time. Julia's voice cracked slightly. We included you in holidays, where I cooked, cleaned, and paid for the groceries while you took credit for hosting, where your friends complimented your hospitality while I washed dishes in the kitchen. Mrs. Washington's voice joined the conversation for the first time. Cold and clipped. Young woman, you seem to be implying that your son's family has taken advantage of you. That's a very serious accusation. Young woman. I was 63 years old, but to her, I was still young enough to be lectured about proper behavior. I'm not implying anything, I said clearly. I'm stating facts. Would you like me to email you the receipts? Through the door, I heard Emma start to cry. I don't understand what's happening, she sobbed. Why is everyone mad? Why won't Grandma open the door? My resolve almost crumbled. But then I heard Julia's response. It's okay, baby. Grandma is just confused right now. Sometimes older people get confused and say things they don't mean. Older people get confused. As if my newfound clarity was actually dementia. As if recognizing abuse was a symptom of mental decline rather than mental health. I'm not confused, Julia, I said firmly. I'm awake. For the first time in 27 years, I'm completely awake. Ryan's voice turned pleading. Mom, please. Let's just talk about this like adults. We can work through whatever's bothering you. You want to talk like adults? I asked. Then start by admitting that you've been using me. That every visit, every invitation, every family gathering has been contingent on what I could provide. Money, labor, childcare, emotional support, all flowing in one direction. "That's not true," Julia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "When was the last time any of you asked about my life without needing something from me? When was the last time you invited me somewhere just because you wanted my company, not my wallet or my services?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd left. Then Michael's voice, small and hurt. "Grandma, do you not love us anymore?" The question hit me like a physical blow. These children, who I'd loved since before they drew their first breaths, who I'd rocked through fevers and read to sleep and cheered at every milestone, they were being taught that love was conditional, that affection came with price tags, that relationships were transactional. "I love you more than you'll ever know," I said, my voice breaking. "But love isn't supposed to hurt this much. Love isn't supposed to make you feel invisible and used and empty inside." "Then why won't you see us?" Emma cried. "Because seeing you means seeing your parents manipulate our relationship. Because every hug comes with a price list. Because I can't watch you learn to treat people the way your parents have treated me." But I couldn't say that to a 7-year-old. "Because Grandma needs to remember who she is when she's not taking care of everyone else," I said gently. Through the door, I heard Charles Washington mutter something about ungrateful and family loyalty. I heard Julia whisper something sharp to Ryan. I heard the children asking questions that weren't being answered honestly. Finally, Ryan's voice, cold and final. "Fine, Mom. If this is how you want it to be, that's your choice. But don't expect us to keep trying forever. Family relationships work both ways." Both ways. After 27 years of a relationship that had worked in exactly one direction, I listened to their footsteps retreating down the hallway, heard car doors slam, engine start, tires on asphalt carrying my family away from me. And for the first time since this whole confrontation began, I felt something unexpected. Relief. That Sunday, the first Sunday in 27 years with no family obligations, I woke up at 9:30 a.m. without an alarm. I lay in bed for a moment, disoriented. Usually by this time, I'd already be dressed and driving to Ryan's house to help with breakfast, or prepping ingredients for whatever family meal I'd been volunteered to coordinate, or picking up last-minute items for some gathering I'd barely be included in. Instead, I heard nothing but the gentle hum of my neighbor's television and the distant sound of church bells from St. Mary's down the street. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No urgent texts about forgotten grocery items. No request to swing by early to help with some household crisis that had mysteriously developed overnight. I made coffee. Real coffee. Not the instant stuff I usually grabbed while rushing out to fulfill someone else's schedule. I sat at my small kitchen table and drank it slowly, watching the morning light move across my walls without checking the time, without calculating drive time, without wondering what emergency might derail whatever I'd planned for myself. The silence felt strange. Not lonely, exactly, but unfamiliar. Like when you finally stop hearing a constant noise you'd learned to tune out. A humming refrigerator or buzzing fluorescent light. And suddenly the quiet feels almost loud in comparison. I called my sister Patricia in Phoenix. "Maggie?" Her voice was immediately alert. "Everything okay? You never call before noon on Sundays." "That's because I've spent every Sunday for the past 3 years making meal prep for Ryan and Julia," I said. "Today I'm not." "Good for you," Patricia said firmly. "About damn time. What are you going to do instead?" The question caught me off guard. What was I going to do? I'd become so accustomed to having my time parceled out according to other people's needs that I'd forgotten how to want things for myself. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't remember the last time I had a completely free day." "Then start small," Patricia suggested. "What's one thing you've thought about doing but never had time for?" I looked around my apartment, seeing it as if for the first time. The books stacked everywhere because I'd never had time to read them properly. The art supplies I'd bought and barely touched. The windows that could use new curtains, chosen by me instead of inherited from someone else's decorating scheme. "I think I want to go shopping," I said. "For myself. For things I actually want instead of things other people need." Patricia laughed. "Revolutionary concept. Go be wildly selfish, Maggie. You've earned it." I drove to the mall, something I hadn't done recreationally in years. Usually my shopping trips were utilitarian missions. Last-minute gifts for children's birthday parties I'd find out about the day before. Groceries for family dinners I'd end up cooking alone. Items from lists Julia would text me when she was too busy to shop for her own household. Today, I wandered. I tried on clothes in colors I liked instead of the neutral tones that wouldn't show stains when I was cooking or cleaning. I bought a deep purple sweater that made my skin look brighter, a pair of earrings that caught the light, a scarf I didn't need but wanted simply because it was beautiful. In the home goods store, I found myself gravitating toward throw pillows in jewel tones, picture frames that would hold my own photos instead of displaying other people's achievements, candles that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon instead of the unscented ones I'd been buying for years in case someone in Ryan's family had allergies. At the bookstore, I bought 3 novels I'd heard about but never had time to read. Mystery books, romance novels, stories with happy endings instead of the dense biographies and self-help books I'd been forcing myself through because they seemed more worthwhile. I spent $247 on myself, the same amount I'd spent last month on Michael's hockey gear that he'd used exactly twice before deciding he wanted to try basketball instead. The guilt hit me in the parking lot. $247 on frivolous things while Emma still needed piano lessons and Julia had mentioned wanting to redecorate their guest bathroom. But as I loaded my bags into my car, I forced myself to do the math differently. $247 over 27 years of motherhood worked out to about $9 per year, less than the cost of a lunch, spread across nearly 3 decades of putting everyone else's wants ahead of my own needs. Maybe I could afford to be selfish for one afternoon. That evening, I hung my new scarf on the bedroom door where I could see it, positioned the throw pillows on my couch, and lit one of the candles while I read the first chapter of a book that existed purely for entertainment. No improving message, no life lessons, no practical applications, just a story about people who didn't exist having adventures I'd never have. My phone rang around 8 p.m., Ryan's name on the screen. I looked at it for a long moment, remembering our pattern. He'd call to apologize for the confrontation, but not really apologize. Just smooth things over enough to restore the status quo. He'd say Julia was worried, that the kids missed me, that families were supposed to forgive and forget. Then he'd mention some upcoming need. A babysitter for next weekend, help with the kids' school fundraiser, my famous potato salad for their neighborhood barbecue. I let it go to voicemail. The message was exactly what I'd expected. Hey, Mom. I know yesterday got a little heated. Julia thinks maybe we all said some things we didn't mean. The kids are asking about you, and I told them you probably just needed some space. Why don't you come over for dinner this week? We can talk everything through like adults. Like adults. Which meant like people who pretended the previous 27 years of exploitation hadn't happened. Who moved forward as if patterns could be changed without anyone actually changing anything. I deleted the message and went back to my book. Monday morning brought a revelation I hadn't expected. I was excited to go to work. For years, substitute teaching had felt like something I did between family emergencies. A job that had to be flexible enough to accommodate Ryan's last-minute needs for childcare or help with household crises. I'd turned down long-term assignments because what if Emma gets sick? Or what if they need me for something important? I'd kept my availability deliberately limited. My income deliberately modest, my professional life deliberately small, so it wouldn't interfere with my role as family emergency responder. But this Monday, I called the district office and asked about longer assignments, full-time positions, classroom management opportunities that might require professional development or evening meetings or Saturday workshops, things I'd avoided for years because they might conflict with family obligations. Mrs. Chen, the coordinator said, surprise evident in her voice. I've been hoping you'd consider expanding your availability. You're one of our most reliable substitutes, and several principals have specifically requested you for longer-term assignments. Specifically requested. By people who valued my skills and experience, who saw me as competent and professional rather than just conveniently available. I accepted a 3-week assignment covering for a teacher on medical leave, 3rd grade, full curriculum responsibility. My own classroom for the first time in years. It would mean lesson planning in the evenings, parent conferences, grading papers on weekends, All the things I'd avoided because they might interfere with being perpetually available to my family. Tuesday evening, as I sat at my kitchen table planning lessons instead of preparing someone else's meal prep, my phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Margaret, I'm really concerned about this cold shoulder you're giving us. The children keep asking when they'll see you again, and I don't know what to tell them. Emma has a school concert next Thursday. I thought you'd want to know in case you wanted to come. We'd love to have you there. We'd love to have you there." After 27 years of attending every school event, every game, every recital, now my presence was presented as a gracious invitation rather than the automatic given it had always been. I looked at my lesson plan schedule. Thursday evening, I was supposed to attend a professional development workshop on reading comprehension strategies, something that would make me better at my job, more valuable in my career, more professionally fulfilled. For the first time in my life as a grandmother, I chose my own professional growth over a family event. I texted back, "Thank you for letting me know. I have a work commitment that evening, but I hope Emma's concert goes well." My phone rang immediately. Julia's voice was sharp when I answered. "A work commitment? Margaret, it's Emma's first solo. She's been practicing for weeks. I'm sure she'll do beautifully," I said calmly. "But you've never missed one of their concerts." "They'll be devastated." "They'll be fine. You and Ryan will be there to support them." "That's not the same thing," Julia said. And for the first time, she sounded genuinely distressed rather than manipulative. "You're their grandmother. You're supposed to be there for these things." Supposed to be. According to whose rules? The same rules that said I was supposed to pay for piano lessons I'd never hear, supposed to babysit every Friday night for events I'd never be invited to, supposed to fund family vacations I'd never be included in. I was there for every concert when my presence was wanted at other family events too, I said quietly. Now my presence is requested only when it's convenient for you. That's not fair. Julia, I interrupted, my voice steady. I won't be there Thursday. Emma will be wonderful, and you and Ryan will applaud, and life will go on. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No anxiety dreams about forgotten obligations, no middle-of-the-night worries about whether I'd disappointed someone, no guilty thoughts about putting my own needs first. For the first time in 27 years, I'd said no to my family and yes to myself, and the world hadn't ended. 3 weeks into my new life, they played their final card. I was grading spelling tests in my temporary classroom after school when my phone rang. Emma's name on the screen, which was unusual. The kids never called me directly. Their phone access was carefully controlled by Julia, monitored and managed like everything else in their household. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was small, tearful. "Mommy says you don't love us anymore." My heart stopped. I set down my red pen and gave Emma my complete attention, the way I should have been doing for years instead of always multitasking between her needs and her parents' demands. "Emma, sweetheart, that's not true. I love you and Michael more than all the stars in the sky. Then why won't you come see us? Mommy says you're punishing us because you're mad at Daddy." Punishing them. Of course, that's how Julia would frame it. Not that their parents had spent years exploiting their grandmother, but that Grandma was being mean to innocent children. "I'm not punishing anyone, honey. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out." "But I miss you," Emma whispered. "And Michael cries at night because he thinks you don't want to be our grandma anymore." Michael cries at night. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar guilt wash over me. These children were being used as weapons against me, and they didn't even know it. They were learning that love was conditional, that relationships could be leveraged, that emotional manipulation was a normal part of family dynamics. "Emma, can you put Mommy on the phone?" "She's not here. I'm calling from Daddy's phone while he's in the shower. Mommy doesn't know." A 7-year-old making secret phone calls to reach her grandmother. This situation had devolved beyond anything I'd imagined. "Where's Mommy?" "She went to her book club. She said they're talking about ways to help families that are falling apart." Her book club? Discussing my family's private business with women who'd never included me, turning my boundaries into entertainment for their Tuesday evening wine gathering. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "I love you and your brother more than anything in the world. but sometimes adults need space to work through problems. It doesn't mean I don't love you. Can you come to my piano recital next week? I learned a new song and I want you to hear it. Piano recital. The lessons Julia had been pressuring me to fund now turned into an emotional obligation designed to draw me back into their orbit. Who's paying for your piano lessons, sweetheart? Daddy got a second job, Emma said proudly. He works at night now, so I can have music lessons. Mommy says it's hard for him, but he does it because he loves me. Ryan got a second job. After 27 years of expecting me to fund their children's activities, he'd finally taken financial responsibility himself. The piano lessons had become possible without my money, but they still expected my emotional investment and attendance. That's wonderful that Daddy is working so hard for your lessons, I said carefully. I'm very proud of both of you. So you'll come? The hope in her voice almost broke my resolve. But then I heard Julia's voice in the background. She'd returned early from her book club discussion about my family's drama. Emma, what are you doing with that phone? Give it to me right now. The phone rustled as it changed hands. Julia's voice came through, tight with barely controlled anger. Margaret, this is completely inappropriate. You cannot involve the children in whatever midlife crisis you're having. Midlife crisis. Every woman who finally stood up for herself was having a midlife crisis, apparently. I didn't call Emma, I said calmly. She called me because she misses her grandmother. She called you because she's confused about why you've abandoned your family. We've been trying to protect them from your issues, but they're starting to ask questions we can't answer. Try answering with the truth, I suggested. Tell them that Grandma got tired of being used for money and free labor while being excluded from everything that mattered. That is not what happened, Julia snapped. We included you in everything that was appropriate. Not every event is suitable for every family member. Appropriate. As if I needed their permission to participate in my own son's life. Julia, I want to see my grandchildren, I said clearly. But I won't do it on your terms anymore. If you want me in their lives, we need to have a very different conversation about what that looks like. What do you mean? I mean no more emergency babysitting calls. No more funding their activities. No more being invited only when you need something. Either I'm family or I'm not. Silence on the other end. Then Julia's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. Fine. You want to see them? Come to Emma's recital next Tuesday, 7 p.m. at the community center. But understand this, Margaret. If you show up and cause a scene, if you embarrass Ryan in front of his colleagues and our friends, you'll never see these children again. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my empty classroom, surrounded by children's artwork and alphabet charts, trying to process what had just happened. They were forcing me to choose, attend the recital on their terms, as their compliant resource, or lose access to my grandchildren entirely. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, but it was also an opportunity. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I researched my legal rights as a grandparent. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. In Illinois, grandparents had visitation rights under certain circumstances, especially when they'd been actively involved in the children's lives and when denial of access would harm the children's well-being. I had documentation, years of school pickup records with my name, photographs of family events I'd funded and organized, bank records showing my financial support for Emma and Michael's activities, text message histories proving my consistent involvement in their daily lives. More importantly, I had witnessed their parents using them as emotional weapons. Emma's secret phone call wasn't an isolated incident. It was evidence of children caught in the middle of adult conflict, being fed information designed to manipulate their grandmother's behavior. Monday evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Instead of agonizing over whether to attend Emma's recital on Julia's terms, I called a family law attorney. Mrs. Chen, the lawyer said after reviewing my documentation, you have a very strong case for grandparent visitation rights. The extent of your involvement in these children's lives, combined with evidence that access is being denied as punishment for setting boundaries, gives us excellent grounds for legal intervention. Legal intervention. The phrase felt surreal. I'd never imagined my relationship with my grandchildren would require court orders and supervised visitation schedules. What would that look like? I asked. We file a petition for regular, unsupervised visitation. Given your history with the children and the circumstances of the current conflict, we'd likely be granted significant time, possibly alternate weekends and some holiday access. The court's primary concern is the children's best interests, and maintaining a relationship with a loving grandmother is typically considered beneficial. Tuesday evening arrived, Emma's recital night. I drove to the community center but not to attend the performance. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched families stream inside, parents carrying flowers for their children, grandparents walking slowly but proudly toward the auditorium doors, siblings fidgeting in dress clothes. Through the large windows, I could see Ryan and Julia taking seats near the front, saving chairs that I assumed were for the Washingtons. They looked relaxed, confident, probably assuming I'd either show up submissively or stay away entirely. They hadn't considered a third option. At exactly 7 p.m. as the recital began, I drove to the courthouse and filed legal documents requesting grandparent visitation rights. That night, I slept peacefully, knowing I'd chosen the one path they hadn't tried to control. The next morning, Ryan called. His voice was strained, confused. "Mom, Emma asked where you were last night. She played beautifully, but she kept looking for you in the audience. Julia thinks you're trying to hurt the kids to get back at us." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said calmly, "but I won't be manipulated through my grandchildren anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll be hearing from my attorney about establishing regular visitation rights. Since you've made it clear that my access to Emma and Michael is conditional on my compliance with your demands, we'll let the court decide what's in the children's best interests." The silence on the other end was deafening. You're taking us to court?" "I'm ensuring that I can maintain a relationship with my grandchildren without being subjected to emotional blackmail." "Mom, this is insane. Families don't sue each other. Families also don't use children as weapons," I replied. "But here we are." I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone. For the first time in 27 years, I'd stopped playing by their rules entirely. The legal papers were served on a Thursday morning while I was teaching my third graders about metamorphosis. Ironically, perfect timing. Ryan called during my lunch break, his voice a mixture of panic and rage I'd never heard before. "Mom, what the hell is this? A court summons? Are you seriously suing us for custody?" "Not custody," I corrected calmly, unwrapping the sandwich I'd made myself, turkey and avocado on bread I'd chosen because I liked it, not because it was on sale. "Visitation rights. There's a difference. This is insane. You can't take your own family to court. You made it clear that seeing my grandchildren was contingent on accepting your financial and emotional abuse. The court will determine what's actually in Emma and Michael's best interests." "Abuse?" Ryan's voice cracked. "Mom, we never abused you. We're your family. Everything we did was normal family stuff. Normal family stuff. 27 years of exploitation reframed as typical family dynamics. Ryan, when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for something. Not to assign me some task. Just to check on my well-being?" Silence. "When was the last time you invited me somewhere without expecting me to pay for it or work during the event?" More silence. "When was the last time you considered my feelings before making decisions that affected me?" "Mom, His voice trailed off. "Take your time," I said gently. "I'll wait." The silence stretched for almost a minute. In the background, I could hear his office, phones ringing, printers humming, the normal sounds of people conducting business. Normal people who probably didn't exploit their mothers for decades, then act shocked when boundaries were finally set. "I can't think of a specific time," he admitted finally, his voice small. "That's the abuse, Ryan. Not violence, not cruelty, just the systematic erasure of my personhood until I existed solely to serve your needs." I heard him crying. My 40-year-old son, crying on the phone like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was still my child, the baby I'd rocked through countless nights, the toddler whose scraped knees I'd kissed better. But then I remembered Emma's secret phone call, Michael crying at night because he thought I didn't love him anymore. The cycle had to end somewhere. "The court date is in 3 weeks," I said softly. You and Julia should get an attorney. That weekend, Julia showed up at my apartment alone. No children, no husband, no backup family members for moral support. Just Julia, looking smaller somehow without her usual entourage and perfectly applied makeup. I let her in this time, curious to see what she'd try when stripped of her usual manipulation tools. She sat on my couch, the one with my new jewel-toned pillows that she immediately noticed and clearly disapproved of, and attempted what I supposed was meant to be vulnerability. Margaret, I need you to understand something. I never meant to hurt you. I made tea while she talked, using my favorite mug instead of the chipped one I usually defaulted to when others were watching. I grew up in a very structured household, Julia continued. My mother believed in clear roles, specific expectations. I thought that's what you wanted too, to be the helpful grandmother, the family supporter. Is that what you call it? I asked, settling into my chair with my tea. Being the family supporter? I know you think we took advantage, but from my perspective, we were including you, giving you purpose. My own mother felt lost when she retired, when her children didn't need her anymore. I thought keeping you involved would make you feel valued. Involved. An interesting way to describe financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Julia, did you ever ask what I wanted? What would make me feel valued? She shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, but you never complained. You always seemed happy to help. Because I was trained to be grateful for any attention from my own family. Because I thought love meant service, and if I stopped serving, I'd stop being loved. That's not true, isn't it? I set down my teacup with deliberate care. When I stopped saying yes to everything, how long did it take before you threatened to cut off my access to my grandchildren? Julia's composure cracked slightly. That wasn't a threat. We were trying to protect them from confusion, by using them as leverage against me, by maintaining stability in their lives. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a manila folder I'd prepared for exactly this conversation. Inside were printouts of text messages, bank statements, calendars marking years of my free labor. Let's talk about stability, I said, opening the folder. Emma's school pickup schedule for the past 2 years. 97% of the time it was me. Not you, not Ryan, me. Because you had yoga classes, pottery workshops, book club meetings, coffee dates with friends I was never invited to meet. Julia's eyes widened as she saw the documentation. Michael's hockey practices, 85% attendance by me, including the practices during that month when you went to Arizona to help your sister move. You didn't ask if I could handle the extra responsibility. You just informed me that I'd be covering everything while you were gone. I flipped through more pages. Family gatherings hosted at your house where I provided the food, did the cleanup, and entertained the children while you socialized with guests who didn't know my name. 17 occasions in the past 3 years. Margaret, we appreciated birthday parties for Emma and Michael where I was responsible for decorations, entertainment, cleanup, and gifts, while you took credit for being such a thoughtful mother. Their friends' parents probably think you're supermom. Julia was quiet now, staring at the evidence of her systematic exploitation. And the money, I continued, pulling out bank statements. $25,000 for your house down payment, $18,000 for private school tuition, $12,000 for your kitchen renovation, $3,000 for hockey equipment and lessons, $2,000 for dance classes Emma quit after 6 weeks, $1,500 for the bedroom furniture set you decided you didn't like and returned. I spread the statements across my coffee table like playing cards. $61,500 over the past 7 years, not including the free childcare, the unpaid housework, the emotional labor of being available for every crisis while being excluded from every celebration. Julia stared at the numbers, her face pale. We never asked you to keep track. You never asked me anything, I interrupted. You just expected. You expected my money, my time, my emotional availability, my silent acceptance of being treated like hired help in my own son's life. She was crying now, mascara creating small, dark trails down her cheeks. What do you want from us? She whispered. I want you to understand that I'm not your resource to manage. I'm Ryan's mother and the children's grandmother, and those relationships have value beyond what I can provide financially. So you'll drop the court case? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative daughter-in-law who'd systematically excluded me from family life, but a woman who'd genuinely never learned how relationships worked without transactional elements. Her own mother had probably trained her to view family members as either useful or burdensome, with no middle ground for simple human connection. The court case proceeds, I said gently, because legal protection is the only way to ensure my relationship with Emma and Michael isn't dependent on your approval or Ryan's gratitude. But the lawyers, the publicity, what will people think? Julia, I said, standing up to signal the conversation was ending. I don't care what people think anymore. I care about being able to love my grandchildren without being extorted for the privilege. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. I really didn't mean to hurt you, she said. And for the first time, I believed she was telling the truth. I know, I replied. But impact matters more than intent. And the impact was 27 years of my life disappearing into your family's needs while my own dreams got smaller and smaller until they barely existed at all. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The absence of guilt. No anxiety about whether I'd been too harsh. No worry about family harmony. No compulsion to smooth things over and make everyone comfortable. Just clarity. And for the first time since this whole journey began, the peace that comes with knowing you've finally stopped betraying yourself. 2 weeks later, the attorneys met for a preliminary hearing. I didn't attend. My lawyer assured me it was just procedural, setting dates and determining what evidence would be presented. But that evening, Ryan called with news that changed everything. Mom, he said, his voice different somehow, humbler, more thoughtful. Julia and I want to withdraw our opposition to the visitation order. What does that mean? It means we want to work this out without the court. We want to agree to regular visitation schedules, holidays, whatever you think is fair. No conditions, no strings attached. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. What changed? We hired a lawyer, Ryan said simply. And when we had to explain our side to a stranger, when we had to justify why we thought limiting your access to the kids was reasonable, we couldn't. We sounded exactly like what you said we were. People who'd been using you. I felt tears starting, but they weren't tears of sadness. So what now? Now we try to be the family you deserved all along, Ryan said. If you'll let us. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment. A bright 2-bedroom place with windows that actually opened and a kitchen where I could cook what I wanted, when I wanted, for whoever I chose to invite. The second bedroom had become my art studio. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, others half-completed experiments in color and light. The watercolor set I'd bought during those first days of freedom had expanded into oils, acrylics, charcoal sketches of the city I was finally learning to explore on my own terms. On the easel sat my latest piece, a portrait of Emma and Michael, painted from a photograph I'd taken during our first court-ordered visitation. They were laughing at something I'd said, their faces bright with genuine joy, the kind that comes from being loved without conditions or expectations. The visitation order had become unnecessary within weeks. Once Ryan and Julia realized their lawyer couldn't construct a reasonable argument for limiting my access to the children, they'd agreed to something that worked better for everyone. Natural, unstructured time that felt like family instead of scheduled obligations. I saw Emma and Michael every other weekend now, but more importantly, I saw them on my terms. We went to museums I wanted to visit, parks I enjoyed, restaurants where the food was good instead of just convenient. Sometimes we stayed in my apartment and painted together, or I taught them card games my mother had taught me, or we read books that had nothing to do with improving their test scores or building their character. They were learning that relationships could exist for their own sake, that love didn't require constant productivity or purpose. Emma had stopped asking if she was being good enough for people to like her. Michael had started expressing opinions about things, what he actually wanted for lunch, which activities he enjoyed versus which ones he did because adults expected it. Most surprisingly, they'd begun protecting our time together. When Julia tried to schedule a dentist appointment during one of our weekends, Emma had politely asked if they could find a different time, because Grandma and I have plans. When Ryan suggested I could help with homework during our museum visit, Michael had said, "That's not what we do with Grandma anymore." They were learning boundaries by watching me maintain mine. Ryan and Julia had started therapy, not couples counseling, individual work to understand how their upbringings had shaped their expectations of relationships. Julia was unpacking her mother's transactional approach to family connections. Ryan was examining why he'd never learned to ask for help without making it someone else's emergency. "I think I was scared," he'd told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings, a new tradition where we talked as adults rather than as mother and son who needed things from each other. Scared that if I wasn't constantly achieving, constantly providing, constantly proving my worth, you'd realize I wasn't worth loving. "So you made me prove my worth instead," I'd replied gently. "Yeah," he'd admitted. "That's exactly what I did." Our relationship was different now. Smaller in some ways. I was no longer the central figure in their household drama, no longer the go-to solution for every problem, but deeper too. Ryan called to tell me about a book he'd read, or to ask my opinion about a decision at work, or just to check how I was feeling, not because he needed something, but because he was curious about my life. Julia had surprised me the most. Once she'd stopped viewing me as a resource to manage, she'd discovered we actually had things in common. We'd started attending art gallery openings together, her knowledge of contemporary artists complementing my growing interest in technique and color theory. She was funny when she wasn't performing, thoughtful when she wasn't calculating what impression she was making. "I'm sorry it took so long," she'd said during one of our gallery visits, standing before a painting of a woman alone in a garden, her face turned toward sunlight. "I'm sorry you had to threaten legal action before I could see you as a person instead of just family infrastructure." Family infrastructure. It was the most accurate description anyone had given of my old role. The financial relationship had ended completely. Not out of spite, but out of necessity for all of us. Ryan and Julia had learned to live within their actual means, to save for things they wanted instead of expecting someone else to fund their lifestyle. I'd started using my money for myself. Art supplies, books, a small travel fund for the trips I'd always wanted to take but never allowed myself. Last month, I'd gone to Portland to visit Patricia, my first solo vacation in over 30 years. We'd explored gardens and museums, eaten at restaurants we chose because the food looked interesting, not because they accommodated complicated family dynamics. Patricia had marveled at the change in me. "You look younger," she'd said, studying my face over coffee in a tiny cafe that served the best scones I'd ever tasted. "Not physically younger, but lighter. Like you've been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down." That was exactly how it felt. Like I'd been holding my breath for 27 years and finally remembered how to exhale. The teaching position had become permanent. The principal had offered me a full-time contract after watching me work with the children, seeing how I balanced structure with creativity, how I made learning feel like exploration rather than obligation. For the first time since Ryan was born, I had professional identity beyond just being someone's mother. My colleagues knew me as Margaret, not as Ryan's mom or Emma and Michael's grandmother. They valued my ideas about curriculum development, asked my opinion about difficult students, included me in after-work social gatherings where conversations ranged across topics that had nothing to do with family drama or children's needs. I was discovering that I was actually interesting when I wasn't constantly worried about everyone else's problems. The woman in the mirror looked different too, still 63, still showing the lines that came from decades of smiling through difficult situations. But the anxiety had left my eyes, replaced by something that might have been peace. I'd bought new clothes, not practical pieces that hid stains and wear, but things I enjoyed wearing, colors that made me happy, styles that reflected choices rather than just function. Tonight was Emma's spring recital, the same community center where I'd sat in the parking lot 6 months ago, filing legal papers instead of attending her performance. But this time felt entirely different. I arrived early and chose a seat in the third row, not because it was where the family was expected to sit, but because I could see clearly from there. Ryan and Julia arrived with Michael a few minutes later, waving when they spotted me but sitting in their own chosen seats, rather than assuming we needed to cluster together as a unit. The independence felt revolutionary, Emma played beautifully, a piece by Chopin that she'd chosen herself rather than being assigned by her teacher. Afterward, she ran to me with flowers Julia had helped her pick out. Not because it was expected, but because she'd wanted to share her achievement with someone who loved her. "Did you like it, Grandma?" "I loved it," I told her, and meant it completely. Not just the performance, but this moment of pure connection without ulterior motives or hidden agendas. Later, as we all gathered outside the community center, Ryan approached me with something I'd never seen in his face before. Genuine gratitude, without any accompanying request. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For fighting for something better instead of just walking away." I looked at my family. Really looked at them. Ryan, learning to be a father without using guilt as a parenting tool. Julia, discovering that relationships could exist without constant negotiation. Emma and Michael growing up understanding that love didn't come with price tags or performance requirements. "I didn't fight for you," I said gently. "I fought for me. You just happened to benefit from me finally valuing myself." As I drove home that night, windows down and music playing, a jazz station I'd discovered and loved, I thought about the caterpillar question little Sophia had asked in my classroom months ago. What if the caterpillar doesn't want to change? Sometimes change isn't about wanting, I'd told her. Sometimes it's about survival. But I'd been wrong about something. It wasn't just survival. It was resurrection, the death of who I'd been. The woman who measured her worth by her usefulness, who mistook being needed for being loved, who had forgotten she existed apart from other people's requirements. And the birth of who I'd always been underneath all that. Someone with opinions and preferences. Someone worth knowing for her own sake. Someone whose laughter came from joy rather than obligation. At home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my art studio, surrounded by paintings that existed simply because I'd wanted to create them. Tomorrow, I would teach children about photosynthesis and fractions. This weekend, I would visit Emma and Michael because we enjoyed each other's company. Next month, I would fly to Seattle to see a friend from college I'd reconnected with, a trip funded by money I'd earned and saved for my own pleasure. For the first time in my adult life, my future belonged entirely to me. The question I wanted to ask you is this. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever loved someone who only seemed to notice you when they needed something? If this story sounds familiar, please share it in the comments. Let me know you're there. And if you found hope in Margaret's journey from being used to being valued, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, and that it's never too late to choose ourselves. Because some doors, once we finally find the courage to close them, open up to rooms we never knew existed.